So it's time for the conclusion video on the Ulefone Armor 2S. Now, I had intended to do a midweek and an end of week video on this, but actually I ran out of time and I just carried on using the thing. I've been using this for actually about 2 weeks now. So here are my impressions of this phone. It's actually quite a competent little phone. The screen is very nice and colourful and crisp for graphics. I didn't have any problems at all really using it. It didn't crash at all or anything like that. Battery life is okay. It's about 60% left after a typical day's use for me, which is good. Not as brilliant as I've seen on some of the other phones I've tested, but still really good. I went out and did my usual round of photos and video testing, so let's have a look at that now. So the still photos first. And then the video tests. Okay, so we're going to go to my usual location to test the outdoor video capabilities, and it seems somewhat appropriate that we're testing a waterproof camera in the pouring rain. So let's go close in, have a look at some detail, and there's a slight delay in focusing, I would say. Let's have a look and see. Are we having to manual focus here? I think we are. So maybe I just haven't got the autofocus set correctly. This hippo was murdered by his friends because he bought the wrong phone. And nighttime video was a bit of a challenge for this phone, and I found that the camera reduced the frame rate in order to continue filming. So we did try a full immersion waterproof test as well, so let's have a look at and see how that went. Well, it wouldn't be much of a test if we didn't drop it in the water and test out the waterproofing. So here goes. I've actually got the selfie cam running, so we're going to have a look at the footage from both directions. So here we go into the water. Interesting. That seems to have stopped the camera recording. That's interesting. I guess that must be the touch screen was activated by the moisture. Let's just try that again. Yeah, so the capacitive touchscreen is activated by the moisture of... So yeah, you can't hope to actually film underwater with this because the water on the touchscreen is the same as fingers on the touchscreen. So yeah, you're going to have trouble filming underwater with this phone, but I guess that's not the purpose of the waterproofing. So we'll take it away and we'll look for any signs of water ingress. These little ports here where the speaker grill is, they're the ones that worry me the most. Now it's worth saying there that even though I had problems actually videoing underwater, it apparently is possible to take photographs underwater by using the hardware camera button there. However, I think you're probably going to find that this phone does not take video underwater easily. The built-in camera app is actually, it's not bad. It's better than some of the other smartphone camera apps we've seen, the cheapy ones. It's got a few more features. So the Pro mode here has got adjustment dials for brightness and saturation and gamma and exposure, white balance and ISO, so you can manually dial up and down those different things with some kind of saturation. We can go down to almost black and white photo, or we can presumably go super vibrant. The video function of the built-in app does not have continuous autofocus, so it's a little bit lacking on features. It's got video format, it's got all sorts of different audio modes and noise reduction and so on, but it hasn't got continuous autofocus, and so when you're videoing it will focus at the start of the video, and after that you have to tap to focus. Now you can overcome that by just using a third-party camera app which will have a continuous autofocus, and I've tested that and that does work if you use a different app. It comes with a little suite of apps called Outdoor Toolkit, which has got sound meter, compass, flashlight, bubble level, picture hanging, heart rate, height measuring, magnifier, alarms, pedometer. I've used the pedometer, that was actually quite good. Plumb bob sounds pretty much the same as bubble level and picture hanging, so I think these are all variations on a theme. Protractor and a pressure gauge. Yes, it has actually got a pressure sensor. I believe that's that little hole right there. So you can use that pressure gauge to measure your altitude if you're climbing up a mountain, for example. So you calibrate it at sea level and then you can figure out how high you've walked. Heart rate's interesting, so you can actually measure your heart rate by placing your finger over the camera and flash, and it will actually measure your heart rate. That's obviously a graphic, that's just a synthetic little thing there, but that's going to measure my heart rate. 79. I'm resting, that's probably about right. So in general use, the phone was good, the call quality was good, the speakers perhaps a little bit on the quiet side if you're using it as a speakerphone or if you're watching video. So it certainly feels like a rugged phone, and a couple of little details that I really liked. There's the rubberized ends here, which definitely feel like they can take a bit of knocking and bumping about. They protrude a little bit above the level of the screen there, which means that there's a little bit of drop protection if it should land on an end or even flat face down on a smooth floor. The camera has a nice little raised lip around the lens which will protect it from that lens being destroyed. I mean, again, there's this rubberized protrusion here which sticks out and prevents the camera from actually contacting any surface you put it on, but that little lip there also protects the camera glass, which is great. So there is quite a bit of a bezel on this phone, but it didn't advertise itself as bezel-less, and you can't expect a rugged phone to be bezel-less. However, the screen to body ratio is actually quite small, so that's just worth noting. If you're thinking about getting one of these phones, you have to have quite a large phone in your pocket for quite an average size screen. Just a couple more things about physical features. It has NFC, that's what this is here. This plastic section here is the NFC antenna. It doesn't have wireless charging. Now that's a bit of a shame really, because I think wireless charging would be more useful than NFC. I haven't tested the NFC, but it's a feature that people use for Google Pay and so on. Wireless charging would have been actually very useful on this phone if they'd included it, because then you could just keep that waterproof door shut all the time and you wouldn't have to wear that out or actually risk having that half open. If you press that fully closed, it's actually quite difficult to open. So it would be nice if we could just leave that closed and wirelessly charge it, but it doesn't support that feature. The other physical feature I think is conspicuously absent is any kind of lanyard hole attachment. It would be quite nice if you could attach, if it had like a strong steel loop maybe, for attaching a lanyard or something like that. For an outdoor phone that you might be using in quite challenging conditions, you maybe want to be able to tie it onto something and strap it onto your wrist or onto your rucksack or something like that, so that it doesn't actually come adrift. So maybe there's a couple of suggestions there for the Ulefone Armor 3 if anybody's watching. So let's just sum up the good, the not so good, and the kind of neutral points about this phone. So on the good side, it was waterproof. We did test it, it was waterproof, and we fully immersed it and we didn't have any problems at all. Even afterwards, no water seeped into anything, no actual signs of water ingress at all. It does seem rugged. It's well equipped for sensors and RAM. It's got a good range of hardware inside the phone. The in-call quality was really good. It's got a colourful and crisp screen. The battery life fairly good, but not the best I've seen. And the fingerprint sensor is, well, it's got a fingerprint sensor, which for a rugged phone is quite unusual. The not so good points. Now, not so good, it's only got a 4-core CPU and it did sometimes seem a bit underpowered or laggy. However, we'll talk about the alternatives to this phone in a moment. The sound volume was fairly weak actually from the external speaker. It only comes out of this one speaker grill here, and it is actually pretty weak, but adequate. The screen in full daylight was actually not really bright enough, so outdoors using this in sunlight or bright daylight, the screen did seem a little bit dark and you end up having to find a shady place to be able to use the phone, which for an outdoor rugged phone is perhaps not such a good feature. So the neutral things, which are kind of, well, I think they're neutral, but you might care one way or the other. It hasn't got a headphone jack. Now, you don't want too many holes in the casing of a rugged waterproof phone, but this one has not got a headphone jack, so you're going to have to use Bluetooth or the USB-C headphone adapter. It's got 6 hardware buttons. Now, that was kind of good because, you know, hardware buttons are unusual on phones these days. However, it's quite difficult to get this out your pocket without pressing one or more of those buttons. And the form factor. So let's just talk about the form factor. It's a bit of a hefty phone. It's physically about the same size as the Maze Alpha, so its outer case dimensions are similar to those of a 6-inch screen phone, but the screen itself is 5 inches. So it's quite a hefty phone for the amount of screen size you get, but that's the price of ruggedness. So that's the summary of the Ulefone Armor 2S. Now, I did say that this phone seemed a little bit underpowered at times with its quad-core processor. There is a big brother to this phone called the Ulefone Armor 2. So this is the Ulefone Armor 2S, and there is the Ulefone Armor 2, which has a couple of upgrades. So it has an octa-core processor, which I'm sure would be much better, and it has a slightly upgraded camera. So I'll put the links to both of those in the video description. Now that is going to be an affiliate link, which means if you click and buy that way, I do make a small commission. If you object to that idea, please just Google it up and don't use my links. So that's the Ulefone Armor 2S. Not a bad phone, and actually I think I probably will continue using this, and it's the sort of phone that I would definitely take on holiday with me, or if I was going on a trek or outdoors, I would take this phone rather than some of the maybe more pocket-friendly phones that we have looked at. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.